Howard's Whirlybirds.
Well, the emphasis of my book is to basically to document, to reveal, to show Howard Hughes' involvement in more than movie making, and more than his dating actresses, and more than his world flights. He actually started a company that produced helicopters, and it had a very tough go of it. But ultimately, the company that he started and the early pioneering work that his company and he did in helicopters resulted in the Apache helicopter of today, which is a world-renowned helicopter used by military forces and also many, many military forces around the world. And it's still produced today, all these years after Howard Hughes has passed away. His fascination with aviation was very simple. It was he learned to fly in 1927. And after he learned to fly, he wanted to be bigger and bigger in it. And he combined his love of aviation with the movie business by producing a movie in 1930 called Hell's Angels. The movie was about the aerial flying, aerial conflicts of World War I, with the Germans flying one airplane and the Allies flying the other. He wanted to film this thing in Los Angeles, which he did, and it cost a fortune to do this, because he hired countless pilots, just like 50, 75 pilots, ground people. All these airplanes had to be fabricated to look like the real thing in World War I. And it was rather incredible. So he filmed this massive, massive thing, spent millions of dollars doing it. And again, here's a young man with no prior experience in making movies, and yet he directed the entire production. The whole thing, the movie is in the can, ready to go. Unfortunately, this was just at the advent of talking motion pictures. And this was a silent picture he had shot. So he had to shoot the entire production over as a talkie before he could release it. He expended about over $8 million in this project, which was a horrendous amount of money in 1930. However, the movie went on to become a best box office hit beyond belief. It premiered in Hollywood at Grauman's Chinese Theater. It was the most elaborate premiere ever, because he even had biplanes flying over the theater showing some of the stunts to the people down below. It was the most amazing thing.
You are looking at Hollywood Boulevard, illuminated for miles in honor of the opening of Hell's Angels. For the first time in history, Vine Street and Hollywood Boulevard has been made into one-way streets for 2 miles through the heart of Hollywood to facilitate the handling of the traffic, bringing the throng to this elaborate opening. The boulevard is decorated for miles and Hollywood surveys throughout the city. 500,000 people are crowding the streets to get a glimpse of the stars and celebrities. All tickets for the first night were sold 24 hours after Sid Grauman announced the opening. You may have seen openings before, but you've never seen anything like this. This is the opening of Hell's Angels.
So now he was successful as a movie maker, and he also got his feet wet in aviation a little. He then went forth because he decided, you know, I want to do more than this. I want to build airplanes. Okay. And a couple of the people that were involved in building some of these World War I replicas for the movie were available to help him design and build another kind of airplane. What evolved was something called the Hughes H-1 Racer, a small single-engine airplane that could go very, very fast. Single-seater. It was low wing, but the unique part, you're talking about 1935 now, the unique part of this airplane was that it had retractable landing gear and it had all flush rivet construction. Very, very low drag, very, very fast. He took it and he set a world speed record at Santa Ana near Los Angeles of 352 miles an hour, which was unbelievable. This made the headlines around the country. So now he was not only a movie maker and an aviation aficionado, but he was also a record-setting pilot. He was so impressed with this airplane, he decided to go to the Air Force and propose its use as a fighter plane during the 1930s. There was no World War II yet, but the military was interested in such possible airplanes for future, combat or whatnot. He went back to Wright Field in Ohio, where the Air Force bought their airplanes, and he proposed this this small H-1 racer to be adapted to a fighter plane, and they turned him down. He was very aggressive about it, and he didn't understand yet the politics of government procurement, how you have to approach things very carefully, methodically. He insulted a lot of the senior officers there. He insulted so many of them that they came back, and it was called the Hate Howard Hughes Club at Wright Field back there, because it was just so, he came on too strong. Meantime, though, he still wanted to build airplanes. This stayed with the man all his life. He wanted to build airplanes of his own design and manufacture them and sell them. The government had come forth, this is 1940 now, and they said they were interested in buying a new pursuit airplane, a twin-engine airplane that could be used in combat, fire weapons, have ordnance on it and whatnot, that type of thing. So he wanted to build an airplane rather than just bid on this thing or whatnot. He decided, I'm going to build the best airplane there is. Well, he built an airplane called the D-2, which was what he thought they would want. And he proposed it to them, and it flew not very long, because there were some problems with it, but he got it in the air. But again, this gets back to the old Hate Howard Hughes Club back at Wright Field, right? They were still leery of this guy, and they also came back and they told him, look, you might have an airplane that can fly and it looks okay, but you're never going to be able to build it because you don't have an aircraft factory. At the time, he had a pretty good-sized hangar at Burbank Airport in Los Angeles, but it wasn't big enough to do anything. He lost the contract to build this thing. And what happened, Lockheed Aircraft got the contract, and they produced what became the world-famous P-38 Lightning fighter plane, which they produced in the area of 10,000 aircraft of that type. It was an amazing thing and an amazing loss for him. But in 1942, there was we were in the war, and there was a real threat in the Atlantic Ocean. German submarines were attacking merchant ships left and right that were bringing all types of wares and war goods and whatnot to Europe. The theory was that if gigantic seaplanes could be built to take off from the United States with all this material and taken over to Europe, they could eliminate the threat. In 1942, he came across a guy by the name of Henry J. Kaiser. And some people may remember that name because there was a car built by that name. It was actually called Henry J. Kaiser. They got together in a partnership to develop an enormous seaplane that would have enormous capacity, carry like 750, 800 troops in it, or an equivalent amount of cargo. To build this thing, it was to be built on the Culver City site where he bought all this land. In 1943, he erected the world's largest wooden hangars there, two of them actually, because that is where this gigantic plane, which later became known as the Spruce Goose, was actually fabricated. The Spruce Goose was interesting, but it took a long time to design and develop and manufacture one airplane. There was a lot of trouble there because Howard had a habit of, he hired a lot of folks that were holdovers, people he liked. There was a combination of degreed college engineers, people educated with college engineering degrees. There's a combination of carpenters, mechanics, all types of folks working there, but it had very poor leadership because Howard always was spread thin. He didn't spend time at the aircraft factory there. He was all over the place. So this project lagged for years and years. The threat later in the war from German submarines attacking merchant vessels went away, or at least way down. And the government lost interest in awarding a production contract for this aircraft. While this was going on, he was still interested in that D-2 we talked about, that pursuit plane that the military turned down. He was able to work the channels very well, you might say, in Washington with the son of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was in charge of the reconnaissance division of the Air Force at the time. And they were looking for a reconnaissance airplane to fly and take pictures. What ultimately came out was Howard did get a 100-plane contract for twin-engine reconnaissance planes, based largely on that D-2. The only difference was the D-2 was interesting because it was made of wood. And it was made of birch, actually, and with a very, very special process to strengthen it, kind of like fiberglass, you might say. And that same process, incidentally, was used for what was called the Spruce Goose, because the Spruce Goose did not have any spruce wood in it. It was actually made of birch. In the case of this modification of the D-2, the government said, we want it made of metal, though, and that was the big change. It was called the XF-11. And the XF-11 was a very powerful twin-engine reconnaissance airplane, very, very large, 3,000 horsepower engines on each side. And against the government's wishes, Howard decided to make the first flight of this airplane from his Culver City airport.
In California, Howard Hughes, wealthy movie maker and aviator, crashes while test flying his new XF-11, a twin-engine photographic plane. A short time after his takeoff, he radioed trouble. Then, trying to make a forced landing on a golf course, he was gravely injured when he undershot and crashed into a residential area in Beverly Hills.
One of the propellers on the airplane had two engines, and each engine drove counter-rotating propellers. And one of the counter-rotating propellers went into reverse pitch during flight. It failed, and the airplane just yawed completely out of control, and it went whammo right into this house. Well, poor Howard, he survived, barely. All his ribs were broken. He had lacerations. It was just awful. And a year later, because there were two prototypes being made, he successfully flew the second prototype. The XF-11, the second flight was satisfactory because the big difference is it did not have the counter-rotating propellers that the first prototype had. And Howard made that flight also, and it was completely satisfactory. So all is going well, it seems. Unfortunately, a short time later, we're nearing the end of World War II now, the government came forth and they pulled back the 100-plane XF-11 contract for this thing because they said we don't need it anymore. So all that ever remained of that project was the single prototype XF-11, the other one being crashed, and that was it. These were not good times for Howard Hughes or his aircraft company. The Spruce Goose was in Long Beach, but the government decided not to buy it because it was no longer needed because the submarine menace had minimized, gone away. And the XF-11 was no longer needed because it was the end of the war, so he had no defense contracts at all. I would like to point out, though, during the war, his Hughes Aircraft Company, which is what it was called, because it got involved in a lot of other things. It got involved in manufacturing a lot of ordnance equipment. What that means is things like ammunition chutes, machine gun mounts, all kinds of things for the wartime aircraft. And it also established a reputation as being a pioneer in airborne electronics. Things like autopilots, the earliest forms of radar, and guided missiles, which was big. So Howard had no interest in that, though. He had no interest in guided missiles or electronics or that. He was strictly an aviation type of person. But he had some capable people involved there running that aspect of his business. And frankly, that's what kept the whole thing alive during the war years, the electronics equipment, which were being bought by the government, actually. In 1947, unfortunately, the war is over, and the government wonders about the Spruce Goose, particularly the Senate. They say, that was a lot of money we spent for that thing, and it never flew. Well, and then there was the XF-11 airplane. We, gave him a contract for 100 airplanes, and the first prototype crashed, and yet we spent a lot of money again with him. We need to have some hearings. They conducted hearings in 1947, and Howard made one of his last public appearances, and he gave a rather profound amount of testimony there. And he explained that it wasn't only government money involved, but he invested a fortune in the Spruce Goose and the XF-11 project.
After the shortcutting of this particular contract, and the contract that you received from the Kaiser Heat.
For that?
I believe it does.
Will you have your counsel get the paragraph?
Well, Senator, may I ask a question?
Well, now, if you'll just wait till I issue a subpoena for Mr. Mars, I've asked you whether or not you would produce him, and you said you didn't know, as I understand it.
I don't remember if that was my answer.
Well, what was your answer?
I don't remember. Get it off the record.
Well, now, Mr. Hughes, I'm asking you what your answer was. And we're not going to have this bickering back and forth. You are before this committee, and you're going to answer the question.
You asked me just now about a reply that I made. My answer is I don't remember. Now, the man is taking it down there. Let's ask him. What?
Will you bring Mr. Mars in at the 2 o'clock session?
No, I don't think I will.
Will you try to bring him in?
No, I don't think I'll try.
All right.
I've put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it. And I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
He gave a very, very good performance. The hearings were split in half. In the middle, several months between the two sessions of the hearings, he went forward to Long Beach and he made the first flight of the Spruce Goose. The first and only flight of the Spruce Goose, going only a mile, but it was in the air, because all his detractors before that said, it'll never fly, it'll never work, it's crazy, stupid idea, etc., and he proved it would fly. When the second session of the Senate hearings convened, he was healed. He was thought of as a hero, maybe a folk hero or whatnot, because the public had looked at him as somebody who was willing to take on the government and try to do something, and he did it, and he put a lot of his own money in, and then he proved it by flying this airplane. The intensity was so much in his favor at the end of the hearings, there was even a campaign to try to get him to run for president of the United States. The hearing's all over. He returns to Culver City, returns to Los Angeles, and he still has no government contracts. He has nothing. What he does own is TWA, and he likes to fly their airplanes around, particularly the Lockheed Constellations, which he had a hand in developing for TWA. A lot of people wonder what happened to the Spruce Goose between, let's say, 1947 and, my gosh, the 1970s, when it actually went on display. Well, Howard had such interest in that aircraft that he kept it in Long Beach, and he had it maintained by a group of at least 200 to 300 engineers and technicians constantly in a humidity-controlled hangar. He also had this aircraft refitted with the latest electronics. He had it painted. He spent millions and millions, tens of millions of dollars over a period of 20 years, even though it never flew again, because he wanted it available anytime. The word was out there to all these workers, if I show up, I want to make sure it's ready to go. So these hundreds of workers all the time kept this thing in perfect condition. He went down there a lot. He spent a lot of time down there, not in meetings or anything, but just like to sit in the airplane. And I remember one time he had a date with him. He went down there, and he went inside, and one of the engineers said, well, your date has been sitting in the car for 6 hours. She wants you to get back. And he said, to heck with that. When I'm finished here, I'll go back down there and I'll see her again. Well, the date happened to be Lana Turner. And this is very typical of how he operated. His work was so important because he dated some of the leading actresses of the day, and yet they'd be lucky to get a date with him sitting in the back of an airplane while he was running up the engines on the edge of an airport, because that's just how he was. Aviation was just everything to him. As we approach the late 40s here, he still had no contract. He flies back to Wright Field, where they're a little bit more happier with him now. They got used to him, and he made some friends there, and he asked for an aircraft contract. He says, it's post-war, it's 1949, I need something to keep my people busy. He had subsidized all these workers working on the Spruce Goose or sitting in Culver City playing cards all day, waiting for a new contract, and he had to get something going. The Air Force said, we don't have anything. 6 months later, the general in charge there calls him up and says, I have a contract, Howard. You might be interested in it. And he said, what is it? He said, well, it's not an airplane. It's something else. Well, what is it? He said, it's a helicopter. A helicopter? Well, I don't really do those. But he said, well, you don't have any other contracts. You might want to consider it. Howard said, yes, okay, I'll take a look at it. Well, what the story is, there was a company in Pennsylvania called the Kellett Aircraft Company that had developed kind of a unique helicopter then, a real unique helicopter. it was going to be the world's largest helicopter. And the company, unfortunately, had run into problems, financial trouble, and the Air Force was very leery of working with them anymore, and so it wanted to take that project away. And the Air Force thought, why not give it to Howard? See what he can do with it, because he's got empty plant space out there. He's got a lot of engineers and technicians that can perhaps tackle this thing. He bought it for only $250,000. He actually hired a lot of the helicopter engineers in Pennsylvania to move to California to work with his own engineers. So that was kind of an interesting mix of people, helicopter people with people that were carpenters and mechanics and people that worked on the Spruce Goose. The aircraft itself was called the XH-17, and it was unique because it was the world's largest helicopter at the time. It was a monster. Its rotor blades were like 6 feet wide, and there were 2 rotor blades, and they were 130 feet, the span of them. This thing could carry 10,000-pound trailers underneath it, and it was unique because the helicopter, unlike most helicopters, didn't have a shaft that spun it around. It had jet engines at the tip of these rotor blades that threw all kinds of flames around. It was very, very noisy, used a lot of fuel, and very, very unique, if you will. It was totally experimental. Anyway, all the bits and pieces went to Culver City. The helicopter engineers and his people put the prototype together. The thing flew, but it never flew very far. It got a lot of publicity, though, because it was the world's largest helicopter that could carry a lot of weight. So there were a lot of media out there for the first flights of this thing. Howard was there, of course, and a lot of pictures were taken of it. But it never flew beyond his local airport, the one with that 10,000-foot runway in Culver City. It never really exceeded the dimensions of that. There were no problems with it, really, and it did something that no other helicopter could do. But when he went down to it in 1952, he went back to the Air Force. We were in the Korean War then, and the military was more interested at that point in a whole bunch of small helicopters for a given amount of money than a few big helicopters for the same amount of money. They had budget constraints. The interesting part of this thing, Howard Hughes never showed any interest in helicopters. He did this only for one reason, because he was unable to get an airplane development contract. He liked airplanes. Helicopters are something new. He thought that's interesting, but he had no personal interest in them. He did it to keep his business operating, really, during some very lean times. But it ended with that one and only helicopter ending on the scrap pile. Simple as that. Now, this is not a very good record for the man at this point, right? You remember the H-1 Racer, one of a kind, right? The Spruce Goose, one of a kind. The XF-11 fighter plane, one of a kind. And now we got the XH-17 helicopter, one of a kind. More than anything in life, Howard Hughes wanted to be a manufacturer, a mass manufacturer of aircraft, and that's why he bought a 1,300-acre site in Culver City, and he put some big buildings in there, and now the guy has nothing again. What he does have, though, he has a cadre of people now in Culver City who are kind of experienced in helicopter design and manufacturing, because you got to remember, you got these people from the East Coast, from Pennsylvania, from Kellett Aircraft to come out. These are some very sharp engineers, and they educated his own people who knew nothing about helicopters on how they work and how to design them, etc. He's smart. He did a little market research, and he found out that in the 50s, the early 50s, there was a big need for small helicopters. And you got to remember, the reason the government told him they weren't going to buy his big one was because they wanted to buy a lot of little ones. He found also in the world civilian aviation that there was a need for 2-seat helicopters for flight training, for transportation, whatever it might be. There was a fairly good market. He set his people to work to design a small 2-seat helicopter. And he felt this would sell well. And he had a particular need to do this also because he really needed to get rolling now. Because in 1952 he had another little problem. It wasn't with Congress this time, but the problem was with the Air Force. As I pointed out, Hughes Aircraft Company in World War II became a Goliath as far as aircraft electronics and guided missile manufacturer. It became the biggest customer to the U.S. military, to the U.S. Air Force, as far as all this very advanced electronic and ordnance equipment or whatnot. And the company had problems. It wasn't always delivering on time. And the Air Force got concerned when you got all your, everything in one basket, there's no competition. They were worried that, he was controlling, in essence, a lot of government actions because he could set the prices on his equipment and whatnot because his technology, the technology of his company was so advanced, other people couldn't compete. Now, when I say that now, Howard Hughes, though, had no interest in any of this, but he had some very, very sharp scientists and engineers working in the electronics area. Howard just liked to play with the airplanes, and in this case, helicopters. He had two people in particular, and if anyone knows, heard of the company called TRW Incorporated, which is notorious for issuing credit reports, two of the people that started that company, Dr. Ramo and Dr. Wooldridge, there's a W and there's the other one, they joined Howard in the late 40s, and they were credited with growing that company phenomenally because Hughes Aircraft ultimately developed DirecTV, they developed the lasers, they developed guided missiles, they developed satellites, all this due to the genius of these type of leaders. So in 1952, the Air Force was concerned that we're putting all our eggs in one basket here, and this is dangerous. And at the same time, Dr. Ramo and Dr. Wooldridge got fed up because they needed more laboratory space and more space to expand. They met with Howard at the Beverly Hills Hotel to ask him to authorize expansion of this Culver City site dramatically to build. There was still a lot of vacant land out there. All this agricultural land was available. Howard said, absolutely not. You're going to have to build it in Las Vegas. That's the only place I want it built, Las Vegas, out in the desert. Well, these are very sophisticated, well-known scientists, and they said absolutely no. Everything came to a head short time later because these two scientists threatened to quit. And the government knew if these guys quit, he's going to have a big, big problem there. And this could definitely affect the projects. The answer to the whole thing was this. Howard Hughes split his companies. He took the Hughes Aircraft Company that made all these electronics, and he took the ownership of that, and it became owned by the Howard Hughes Medical Institute, a foundation. And that would be devoted to doing research for life-saving techniques for people. Because you got to remember, his father died of a heart attack when he was 18, and his mother died while she was pregnant in surgery when he was 16. He had a very sensitivity to that. In 1968, Howard Hughes had a lot of dilemmas. He lived in a lot of places in the world, and one of the places he lived happened to be in Las Vegas in 1968. He lived in a penthouse on top of the Desert Inn Hotel there, and it was going to be a temporary stay, but it went into a multi-year stay because he ended up buying a lot of real estate there. On a particular day in 1968, he was very upset because the government had planned to do some underground bomb testing in Nevada not far from his hotel, and he was upset that could rattle the hotels and scare the guests and create all kinds of havoc. He sent a letter to President Lyndon Johnson at the time, telling him that the bombing, the testing that is, should be postponed, and it was unnecessary because it could cause him great problems for all the properties in Nevada. At the bottom of the letter to Lyndon Johnson, he also happened to say, I also have developed a helicopter for the Army, and I built about 700 of them, and I lost over 1/4 of all my finances in the world over this thing. And I wonder if you could help me on that. Maybe we could work together or something, because this tremendous financial loss was something I could hardly bear. He was interested in Lyndon Johnson stopping the testing, and Lyndon Johnson somehow either giving him another or doing something. The president never answered the letter. What really happened here was a few years before that was he developed a small light observation helicopter for the Army. And
what was the name?
The name of the helicopter was the Hughes 086A helicopter. And it actually goes back a ways because it was developed for the U.S. Army, but at the time the U.S. Army Got to remember, in World War II, the U.S. Army also flew airplanes. In the late 40s, the U.S. Army was divided into the U.S. Air Force and the U.S. Army. The Air Force took the airplanes. U.S. Army stayed with ground troops. Because of that, it was felt that the U.S. Army that wanted this helicopter was not really too skilled in evaluating new types of designs. So in 1960, the Army said, we want to buy a new small light scout helicopter with a turbine engine in it. They weren't allowed to procure it themselves, so they had to go through either the Air Force or the Navy to act as a procuring agency. They went to the Navy. The Navy then sent out requests for proposals to industry. They got 17 proposals back from different companies, including Howard Hughes, to build this small helicopter. And Howard had built small helicopters earlier in the 50s, two-seaters, so he felt pretty qualified to do this. And this Navy board evaluated all the proposals, and they came back, and they decided they would award the contract to a company called Hiller Aircraft, who had made also helicopters, but not Howard. He was very upset at this. He sent his executives back to talk to the Navy people. That was of no use. He then went back. What happened was there was such noise over this that the Army actually set up a procurement board, because the Navy thing wasn't working out, to listen and to see if maybe some of the other companies should be involved in this. This board set up by the Army decided that they're going to open the competition to two companies. Hiller again, but also another company called Bell Helicopter Company in Texas. Again, Howard was left out of the picture. That did not happen this time. Through various political means, friendships on Capitol Hill and whatnot with his lobbyists, he was able to manipulate this very well, and eventually the competition was open to Hiller, Bell, and finally Hughes to produce a small scout helicopter for the Army, which ultimately would find a lot of use in Vietnam. And that's how it unfolded. Each company produced 5 prototypes, and they were flown off against each other in a competitive fly-off to find the best one performing. And they all actually felt pretty good. The Army then decided they want to go forth to the next stage and buy these helicopters. They wanted to buy 1,000 of them. Howard was very, very interested in this, because here's a guy who never got a production contract. He said, I can almost taste it. This is going to happen. So he got together and decided to do something in government circles which is called a buy-in on a contract. He bid $20,000 per airframe, and that sounds like nothing now, but in the 60s it was something. That was the airframe he was going to build. The government would supply its own engines and the electronics and everything, but just the airframe. But his cost would be $30,000 per aircraft. He was willing to take a hit of $10,000 per aircraft because he was so intent on manufacturing aircraft. This was his dream. Well, he came in low bidder. He won. He won a contract for almost 1,000 aircraft. Now here's a company that never produced anything in production again, right? Didn't have that expertise. So he's got the contract, and it was a mess. He was supposed to produce 90 of these helicopters every month at the Culver City plant. It never happened because he was way behind on time. Some of them came off the line, some didn't. He had to hire a lot of people. A lot of people that work in there didn't know what they were doing. It was a very difficult thing. In the meantime, the Vietnam War was heating up, and these helicopters were needed over there. And they were used over there. So there was constant pressure on him to produce. To his credit, and to the credit of the company, it worked out fine because he was able to get helicopters in the combat zone. They were scout helicopters in Vietnam. What that meant was they flew very vulnerable missions right over the treetop where they got shot down a lot. So they were almost disposable, I hate to say that, but it was a very hazardous mission. So the Army came back later on and they said, we need more of these. Can you build more of these? And they came back with a contract. They said, we need another 166 of these things. Give us a bid on this. Well, the bid went from $20,000 up to $55,000. That's a lot of money. That's a big increase. The Army, though, wanted to keep this quiet, and they said, well, that's the price it is. Well, unfortunately, that information leaked out to Congress. It leaked out to a subcommittee of the House of Representatives. Gee, he said it only cost $20,000 first time, now it's $55,000. Who knows what it's going to be next time? Well, the Army quietly stopped the procurement, but that didn't stop an investigation. And there was a big flap in D.C. There were major hearings here on the part of a subcommittee of the House Armed Services Committee, and a lot of dirty laundry came out during this hearing, and it was found out that Howard Hughes had done a little industrial espionage, and he had found out what the bid price was for the Hiller aircraft entry in that proposal, and decided to bring that down below that level. This was all brought out. Very embarrassing. In the meantime, though, in Vietnam, this aircraft was incredible. It was one of the best helicopters ever built, frankly. It was so durable that people had even crashed in it because it was survivable. It was amazing. They walked away, and there are many veterans walking around today who just love that aircraft because it saved their life. It's heralded as one of the most fabulous aircraft that ever went into combat because it was very, very simple. It has a single turbine engine in there. It carried like 5 people. It was very lightweight, very simple to repair, and it went on and on and on all day long and all night long with practically no maintenance. And again, the biggest thing was its crashworthiness, because when it would crash, which happened a lot, not due to its fault because being shot down, the people didn't get hurt. They walked away from incredible wrecks. So there was a tremendous demand for this aircraft. It wasn't like Howard produced aircraft that were nobody wanted or anything. They wanted them. They wanted more. But the problem was these pricing issues. Well, finally, later in the war, in the 1960s, the Army needed a lot more of these light observation helicopters. And they decided, well, Howard here, on the OH-6A, he had raised the price and so forth. We owe it to ourselves to go back to some of those other companies also and see what they would charge if we bought 2,200 of these things. That's how many they needed, over 2,000 of them. So they went to Howard, they went to Bell Helicopter, and they said, could you give us a price for these aircraft, for 2,200 of them? Well, Howard got personally involved in this. In his penthouse on the Desert Inn in Las Vegas, he got involved totally in the pricing of this. Howard decided to charge $54,000 per aircraft, and that's what Bell Helicopter bid. Unfortunately, he bid $2,000 higher than Bell. He lost the contract for 2,200 of these light observation helicopters, and Bell Helicopter walked away with a $123 million contract. That was it for the OH-6A for Howard Hughes. The good point is, though, the OH-6A was converted into a commercial helicopter called the Hughes 500, which is still flying around today and still being manufactured today as a legacy to that early design, which is phenomenal. In 1972, they came back to Bell Helicopter and Hughes, and they said, can you develop a aircraft that will have ordnance on them, rockets on them, to blow up tanks? The aircraft that evolved was called the Advanced Attack Helicopter, which is known today as the Apache. This helicopter was developed way back there in 1972, and it's very sophisticated also. A lot of very fancy electronics. It was really a challenge for the Hughes organization to propose this and then to produce prototypes of this. To give a rough idea of what these helicopters cost, in those days even, it was about $30 million a piece, 30 to 35 million. Well, one rotor blade early on cost, and you got 4 rotor blades, was $140,000. You're talking about a gigantic jump, right? This is phenomenal. This is big money. Now, Howard Hughes, by this time in 1972, was ailing. Howard Hughes was living in hotels wherever he wanted around the world. He was actually living out of Las Vegas at that point, and he had moved to Mexico. However, Howard didn't see anybody, but he sure used the phone a lot. And he told his people, you keep moving on this thing and you keep going ahead. Unfortunately, Howard never saw in his lifetime how far the Advanced Attack Helicopter, later called the Apache, would succeed. It was phenomenal. It is still the leading attack helicopter in the world today, in not only the United States, but overseas. Unfortunately, Howard Hughes died in 1976, the summer of 1976. The Apache helicopter, it went on. It served in the original Desert Storm War. It serves today in Iraq and Afghanistan. It has gone on and on and on. So if anything, this is a tremendous legacy of Howard Hughes, because if he would have never gotten into the helicopter business back in 1949 with that X-817, that big one, and all the little ones in between, there would be no Apache helicopter today. So it is a legacy. And the one thing he did say toward the end of his life, he said, the one thing I missed in life was to produce aircraft in volume. I wanted to be a major aircraft manufacturer, and I never achieved that. In spite of all his other successes in Hollywood, his successes in making flight records and owning TWA, he never achieved that. But in essence, after his death, he did.